Why didn't they fight back? In the spring of 1940, something strange happened in Eastern Europe. Three independent countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, vanished from the map. No major battles, no international outcry, no dramatic final stands. In less than 2 weeks, Soviet troops marched in, puppet governments were installed, and by the end of the summer, all three nations had requested to join the Soviet Union. But here's the question no one could answer at the time. Why didn't they resist? Why didn't anyone fight back? The truth is more chilling than any battlefield story, because the war for the Baltics wasn't won by tanks alone. It was won through deception, timing, and psychological warfare. And the first move happened long before the troops crossed any border. The story begins in August 1939, nearly a year before the invasions. That's when the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, two sworn ideological enemies, sat down behind closed doors and made a deal that would shape the fate of Europe. Publicly, it was called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a so-called non-aggression treaty. But the real deal was in the secret protocols, hidden maps and written agreements that carved up Eastern Europe like slices on a table. Estonia and Latvia were handed over to the Soviet sphere. Lithuania at first went to Germany. But Stalin wanted all three Baltics. So just weeks later, the Nazis traded Lithuania to the Soviets in exchange for a bigger chunk of Poland. These weren't negotiations. These were transactions, treating sovereign nations like poker chips. And just like that, the Baltics were doomed before they even knew it. But the plan to take them over wouldn't come with an invasion. Not at first. In September 1939, after crushing eastern Poland, the Red Army turned its eyes north. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were pressured into signing what were called mutual assistance treaties. The name sounded peaceful, almost friendly, but the reality was anything but. The treaties gave the Soviet Union the right to station troops, build airfields and naval bases, and control key points of infrastructure inside each country. Soviet garrisons appeared overnight. Thousands of soldiers moved in. They weren't at war, but they were already there. At the same time, the USSR launched a second phase, political infiltration. Soviet agents recruited local communists and sympathizers. Propaganda flooded newspapers and radios, attacking the governments and painting them as corrupt, fascist, and anti-worker. Within months, Moscow had spies in high places, military bases on strategic routes, and an information war that made the Baltics look like the villains in their own story. And still, no shots were fired. But that would soon change, because in 1940, the world turned away. June 1940, Europe was on fire. Germany had just taken France. Britain was clinging to survival. The United States remained neutral. For the Baltic states, this meant one terrifying thing. They were alone. No allies, no support, no one coming to help. And Stalin knew it. On June 14, while German troops were parading through Paris, the Soviet Union sent ultimatums to Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. The demands were impossible. Allow unlimited Soviet troop entry, arrest specific political leaders, and form new governments approved by Moscow. The excuse? Alleged violations of the earlier mutual assistance treaties, conspiracies, mistreatment of Soviet troops, and anti-Soviet activities. Behind the paper demands stood force. The USSR had mobilized over 430,000 soldiers, 3,000 tanks, and 500 armored vehicles for the operation. The Baltic armies were tiny in comparison, lightly armed, lacking aircraft, running low on ammunition. They faced a brutal choice: resist and be destroyed, or submit and hope to survive. With no allies, no military chance, and no time, the governments caved. But that was just the beginning, because the tanks were already moving. On June 15, 1940, before the ink on the ultimatums was even dry, Soviet troops crossed into Lithuania. It was not a war, it was an operation. Soviet mechanized brigades surged forward with BT-7 and T-26 tanks. Fast, light, and perfect for rapid occupation. Infantry divisions followed, sweeping up strategic points, towns, crossroads, rail stations. The capital, Vilnius, was surrounded by midday. Transportation was paralyzed. Military police seized key corridors. By nightfall, Lithuania was occupied. The very next day, June 16th, Latvia and Estonia received their own ultimatums. And on June 17th, Soviet forces struck. In Latvia, troops surged in from the north and east, supported by the Baltic fleet. Marines stormed the ice-free port of Liepāja. Destroyers blocked the coast to prevent escape. Motorized divisions raced toward Riga. In Estonia, armored divisions crossed through Narva, targeting roads to Tallinn. Meanwhile, Soviet ships landed troops on the islands of Saaremaa and Hiiumaa. Within hours, Soviet aircraft controlled the skies. Airfields were taken. Bridges were seized. Not a single battle was fought. Local forces had been ordered not to resist. Soviet flags were raised. The media announced liberation. And then came the final act. Moscow didn't just want land, it wanted legitimacy. Once the military phase ended, the political theater began. Presidents and prime ministers were forced to resign. New people's governments, handpicked by Moscow, were installed. Then came the elections, or rather, something that looked like elections. Only one political party was allowed, the Workers' People's Union. The ballots offered no real options. Voting wasn't secret. In many places, the results were announced before polls even closed. New parliaments were formed, and within days they voted unanimously, with no debate, to join the Soviet Union. By early August 1940, the process was complete. August 3rd, Lithuania annexed. August 5th, Latvia annexed. August 6th, Estonia annexed. All three countries, gone in less than 2 months. But the real terror hadn't started yet. That was coming next. With the Baltics now part of the USSR, Moscow moved fast to erase the past. Private property was confiscated. Banks, industries, and farms were nationalized. Political parties were banned. Newspapers shut down. Symbols of national identity erased. The Soviet secret police, the NKVD, opened offices in every major city. Surveillance networks grew overnight. Informants were planted in schools, factories, even apartment buildings. And then the arrests began. Former politicians, military officers, teachers, and even clergy were targeted. Some were executed in secret. Others disappeared into Soviet prisons, never seen again. But the most horrifying event came in June 1941, just 1 year after the invasion. In a single coordinated operation, around 75,000 people were deported from the Baltics. Families were dragged from their homes at night. Children separated from parents. People sent to remote camps in Siberia and Kazakhstan. Terror was total. Resistance was unthinkable. Until something happened that changed everything again. On June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. The Baltic region, now fully Soviet territory, became the front line. And some in the Baltics, still reeling from mass deportations, saw the Germans as potential liberators. But that illusion didn't last. The Nazi occupation from 1941 to 1944 brought more oppression, more arrests, more executions. There was no independence, no revival of national governments, just another brutal regime. In 1944, the Soviets returned. The Germans were pushed out, but this time the USSR wasn't pretending to be friendly. The second occupation would be permanent and worse than the first. But not everyone gave up. Not yet. Deep in the forests, a new kind of resistance was forming. They called them the Forest Brothers, partisans from all three Baltic countries who refused to surrender. They hid in the woods, carried out ambushes, and attacked Soviet officials. They sabotaged roads, published underground newspapers, and spread messages of defiance. But the Soviet response was ruthless. Villages suspected of helping the partisans were burned to the ground. Families were deported. The NKVD sent disguised agents to infiltrate the resistance, betray them from within. By the early 1950s, the partisan movement was crushed. And that's when the final phase began. full Sovietization, collectivized farms, Russian language schools, national history erased, religion suppressed. The Baltics had not just been conquered, they had been rewritten. But the memory of resistance never fully died. So why didn't Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania resist in 1940? Because they were never given the chance. Their fate was sealed in a secret pact between two superpowers. Their governments were infiltrated, their borders were surrounded, and when the moment came, they were isolated, outgunned, and abandoned by the world. The Soviet Union didn't conquer the Baltics with a war. It did it with strategy, deception, and overwhelming force. And by the time anyone realized what had happened, it was already too late.